My family hijacked my vacation for my golden sister, but I had secret plan that left them reeling. Hello, read it. At 28 years old, I had mastered the art of being invisible. Not in the literal sense, of course, but in the quiet, soul-eroding way of someone who had spent their entire life being pushed to the sidelines. It wasn't something I had chosen, but something that had been chosen for me long ago, before I was even old enough to understand the weight of it. My name is Evelyn Carter, and if you ask my parents to describe me, they would probably say I was responsible, steady, independent, fine on my own. That last one, they wouldn't say out loud, but I had learned to hear it in their silences, in a way their attention always drifted past me to land squarely on my younger sister, Madison, the golden child, the one who had never needed to ask for anything, because the world had been handed to her on a silver platter from the moment she was born. Madison was only 2 years younger than me, but sometimes it felt like she had lived an entirely different life, where I was expected to be mature, to be self-sufficient, to handle things. She'd been raised in a cocoon of unwavering support. My childhood had been a series of lessons in sacrifice, in understanding that my needs came second, or third, or fourth, depending on how many people required more from me. And when Madison became a mother, that hierarchy had only solidified. My parents adored her children. It wasn't just normal grandparent love, it was obsession. They would drop everything for them, reschedule their lives, plan around their needs, which in theory I understood. It wasn't the fact that they loved their grandchildren that bothered me. It was that in their eyes, my worth had shrunk even further. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't the one bringing them joy through new life. I was just their other daughter, the one who didn't need anything because she had always figured things out alone, the one they never worried about, the one they assumed was happy to be overlooked. I'd spent years swallowing that bitter truth, pretending it didn't matter, pretending I was okay with being second place. But the truth was I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time. And so, when I had finally saved enough for a solo vacation, something just for me, it had felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost somewhere along the way. I had spent months planning, researching, fantasizing about my escape. A week on an isolated stretch of coastline, far from the demands, the expectations, the never-ending role I had been forced to play. I had booked a private beachfront villa, picturing myself alone with a book, a glass of wine, the sound of the waves replacing the constant hum of responsibility that followed me everywhere I went. It wasn't just about getting away. It was about freedom. I had never truly had freedom before, but in my family, nothing was ever truly mine. It had been a mistake to tell them. I should have known better. I should have expected what happened next. But some foolish, naive part of me had thought, just this once, they might be happy for me. Then my mother might smile and say, "You deserve this, Evelyn." Then my father might nod with something like approval. Instead, my mother's face had twisted into something close to shock. "Alone?" she had repeated, like the very idea was absurd. "Why would you go alone?" She hadn't said it with curiosity. She had said it like an accusation, like I had made some terrible, reckless mistake. And then, before I could even answer, my sister had spoken. Madison had the uncanny ability to make a demand sound like an innocent suggestion. She didn't ask for things. She merely spoke them into existence, and people bent to her will without even realizing it. And so, with a soft, dreamy sigh, she had mused about how wonderful it would be if we made a family trip, how much her kids would love it, how nice it would be for all of us to spend time together, to make memories. She hadn't even needed to push. The second the words left her mouth, my parents were nodding along, already making plans. Within minutes, my trip had been hijacked. The carefully selected villa I had booked, replaced with a family-friendly rental home. The tranquil, peaceful escape I had envisioned, overwritten by the chaos of my sister's children, the never-ending demands of a trip that would inevitably revolve around them. I had tried to protest. I had said, as firmly as I could, that this was supposed to be my vacation, that I had planned this for myself, that I had paid for it. But my objections had been met with the same tired responses I had heard my entire life. Family comes first. Your sister works so hard. She deserves a break. The kids need this. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? And just like that, my solo trip had turned into another obligation, another expectation, another chapter in the long, exhausting book of my life where I was cast as the one who made things easier for everyone else. I knew how this would go. Madison would spend the trip relaxing, sipping cocktails by the pool while I was stuck babysitting her children. My parents would fawn over her, fuss over the kids, barely acknowledging my presence, except when they needed me to do something. My carefully saved money would stretch to cover group meals, activities I had never wanted to be part of. I had spent my entire life being the afterthought, the background character, the one who sacrificed, who gave, who was expected to put her own needs aside because that was what good daughters did. But this time they were wrong. This time, I wasn't going to let them take something from me. Because this time, I had a plan. They thought they had one. They thought they had backed me into a corner. But they didn't know that I had already found a way out. And they wouldn't see it coming. The day we arrived at the rental house, I watched the last remnants of my carefully planned escape slip through my fingers. I had already accepted that this trip was no longer mine. The moment my parents and Madison forced their way in, I knew any hope of solitude had been extinguished. But standing there, staring at the massive, family-friendly beach house they had chosen, I felt the finality of it settle deep in my bones. It was a pastel-colored monstrosity, the kind of vacation home designed for chaotic family gatherings. It had an open floor plan, bunk beds stacked high for the kids, a massive communal space that practically screamed togetherness. Every inch of it had been carefully curated to ensure that privacy was an impossibility. I was already suffocating. Madison swept in first, declaring one of the master bedrooms as hers before anyone else had a chance to speak. My parents took the other, leaving me with a choice between sharing a room with my nephews or squeezing into a tiny guest room with a twin bed shoved against the wall. No one asked if I was okay with this arrangement. No one even glanced in my direction. Because why would they? I had never been someone they needed to accommodate. I was an accessory to their plans, nothing more. The first 2 days passed exactly as I had predicted. Mornings were chaos, filled with the noise of my sister's children demanding attention, breakfast, entertainment. Madison played the role of exhausted but devoted mother, sighing dramatically whenever anyone asked her for anything, making sure to comment loudly about how badly she needed this vacation. My parents doted on her, whisking the kids away just long enough for her to lounge by the pool with a mimosa, only to return them to me the moment they got restless. I had become the default babysitter. Again, my time wasn't mine. It never had been. Every time I tried to slip away, down to the beach, out onto the balcony, anywhere that offered a sliver of peace, I was dragged back. Evelyn, can you watch the kids for a second? Evelyn, can you help with dinner? Evelyn, don't be rude. Come sit with us. I had expected this. I had prepared for it. Because unlike them, I knew this trip wasn't going to end the way they thought it would. They had taken my escape from me, but they didn't know I had planned another one. That night, while they were all occupied, my parents tucking the kids into bed, Madison scrolling on her phone, pretending to be too exhausted to move, I slipped outside. The warm night air wrapped around me as I walked down the quiet street, my feet carrying me with a certainty that had been missing in every other part of my life. The key was already waiting for me, right where it was supposed to be. A second rental, a backup plan. I had booked it the same day Madison hijacked my trip, an impulsive act of defiance that I hadn't even been sure I would follow through on. It was a small, private cottage a few miles down the coast, secluded, quiet, untouched by their chaos. I had hesitated, wondering if I had the nerve to actually go through with it, to leave them behind without a word. But standing there now, staring at the simple wooden door, I knew there was no hesitation left in me. I unlocked it, stepped inside, breathed in the silence like it was the first real breath I had taken in years. This was mine. Finally, something was mine. The first night in my private sanctuary felt unreal. I stretched out in the king-sized bed, listening to the distant sound of the waves, the eerie quiet of a space where no one expected anything from me. No demands, no guilt, no weight pressing down on my shoulders. It was intoxicating, but I wasn't naive enough to think I had gotten away clean. By morning, my phone was flooded with missed calls. My mother, My father. Madison. A flurry of texts, each one escalating in urgency. Mom, where are you? Dad, you didn't say anything about going out last night. Madison, are you serious right now? And then the guilt trip I had been expecting. Mom, we were so worried. You could have at least told us where you were going. The boys were asking about you. Of course. The boys were asking about me. That was the tactic. Not we need you, but the children need you. The same manipulation they had been using for years. I stared at the messages, letting each one sink in, and then did something I had never allowed myself to do before. I turned off my phone. I let them sit with their confusion, their frustration, their sudden, desperate realization that I wasn't at their beck and call. And then, I did something even more unthinkable. I spent the day doing whatever I wanted. I walked the shoreline until my legs ached, tracing patterns in the sand with my feet. I sat on the porch of my cottage with a book, uninterrupted for the first time in what felt like forever. I ate a meal alone, in blissful silence, without having to cut food into tiny pieces for anyone else. It was the simplest of freedoms, and yet, I had never felt anything more revolutionary. By nightfall, I turned my phone back on. The texts had escalated. Madison, this is actually so selfish. Do you even care about anyone but yourself? Mom, we're just so disappointed. We thought you understood how important family is. Dad, you need to come back. Not do you want to come back? Not are you okay? Just you need to. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. I didn't need to come back. I didn't need to be their babysitter, their fallback plan, their constant source of unpaid emotional labor. I didn't need to keep setting myself on fire just to keep them warm. I had spent 28 years being the responsible one, the steady one, the one who could always be counted on to sacrifice herself for the comfort of others. But this time, I was choosing myself. This time, I was disappearing. They had stolen my trip, but they were never supposed to be part of my real vacation. And now, they had no idea where I was. For the first time in my life, I had done something entirely for myself, without explanation or compromise. The first 2 days of my secret getaway were blissful, an escape I had only ever dreamed of. I had no schedule, no responsibilities, no one calling my name or demanding my time. I woke up when I wanted, walked along the shoreline with no urgency, and spent hours reading uninterrupted. The silence was liberating, the solitude intoxicating, but in the back of my mind, I knew it couldn't last forever. By the third day, the messages from my family had shifted. My mother's tone had softened, her words carefully laced with worry rather than accusation. My father's frustration bled through, an impatient reminder that I should be more mature about this. My sister's messages were the same, as always, condescending, dismissive, irritated that I had dared to disrupt the balance of the world that revolved around her. Their words no longer had the power they once did, yet something deeper inside me refused to fully relax. There was an unease I couldn't shake, a nagging sense that I was being watched. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. Years of being controlled had conditioned me to expect consequences whenever I stepped out of line. Perhaps it was the guilt they had drilled into me for decades, rising to the surface now that I had finally chosen myself. But then, the incident started. It was small things at first. The door to the cottage, though I was certain I had locked it, would be slightly ajar when I returned from a walk. My sandals, left neatly by the entrance, would be out of place. The book I had left open on the nightstand would be flipped to the wrong page. Little things, easy to ignore, easy to blame on my own forgetfulness, except I wasn't the kind of person who forgot details. My whole life had been about precision, about making sure I never gave anyone a reason to accuse me of being careless. On the fourth night, the unease became something real. Just past midnight, as the wind howled outside, I heard a knock at the door. Not the casual, hesitant tap of a lost traveler, but a deliberate, measured knock. 3 beats, then silence. My breath stilled as I crept toward the door, my heart pounding in my ears. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but shadows. No movement, no sound, but I knew, in the deepest part of me, that someone was there. Seconds passed, stretching into an unbearable silence. Then, through the thin barrier of the door, a voice emerged from the darkness. My sister had found me. I stepped back, my body rigid, my mind racing. I had been so careful. I had paid for the rental in cash, used no traceable transactions, told no one where I was going. And yet, she had found me, standing outside my door like a predator who had patiently tracked its prey. She knocked again, this time with less patience, her voice laced with amusement. She was always like this, never angry, never outright hostile, just full of that infuriating confidence that made it clear she believed she had already won. I didn't answer. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, after a long pause, she exhaled sharply, as if my resistance was nothing more than an inconvenience. Her footsteps eventually faded into the night, but I knew she wasn't gone. She had found me once. She would try again. By morning, my phone was flooded with new messages. My parents had been informed, their worry carefully disguised as disappointment. My father's words carried a sharp edge, an insistence that I had made my point and it was time to come back. My mother leaned into guilt, reminding me of the children, of how much they missed me, of how selfish it was to isolate myself like this. My sister, predictably, had nothing but contempt to offer. She had never respected boundaries, and this was no different. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, my thoughts unraveling. They had tracked me down, which meant I had made a mistake. I retraced every step, every decision, every possible crack in my plan. And then, the realization struck me like a cold slap. My phone. Even though I had kept it off for most of the trip, I had turned it back on the previous night to check their messages. That was all it had taken. A single moment of weakness. A single misstep. She had used location tracking, the same method she had used a dozen times before when she wanted to prove she was always one step ahead of me. It was a game to her. She hadn't come because she was worried. She had come to reassert control, to remind me that no matter how far I ran, I would never truly escape. I was still playing by her rules. But she was wrong. I packed my things. Not out of fear, not because I was giving in, but because I refused to let her corner me. If she thought she could manipulate me into crawling back, she had underestimated how much I had changed. This time, I wasn't just running. I was erasing myself. I wiped my phone, performed a full reset, severed the last remaining thread that connected me to them. I had spent my whole life believing they would always have a hold on me, but now, as I powered down the device for the last time, I realized something. They wouldn't find me again, and they would never see me coming. The moment I powered down my phone, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't fear, wasn't guilt, just a cold, absolute certainty. I had spent 28 years under their grip, molded into someone who lived for their approval, their expectations, their needs. But the second I severed that last connection, I became something else. Something they could no longer track, manipulate, or control. I became a ghost. Leaving the cottage was easier than I had expected. I had packed lightly, anticipating that I might need to move quickly. I took only what I needed, careful not to leave behind anything that could be traced. Madison thought she had won by finding me once, but she had underestimated just how much I was willing to disappear. By sunrise, I was on the road, handing over cash for a taxi that took me to the next town over. From there, I boarded a bus, blending into the sea of travelers heading toward destinations unknown. No reservations, no paper trail, no predictable pattern for them to follow. I had always been the responsible one, the predictable one, the daughter who could always be counted on to be exactly where they expected. But not anymore. Hours passed, and with every mile, the weight on my chest lessened. I watched unfamiliar landscapes blur past, felt the air shift as I moved further away from the life that had smothered me. There was no fear, no second-guessing. I had never been more certain of anything. The sensation was surreal, knowing that at this moment, my family was probably still scrambling, trying to track my next move, expecting me to falter, to give in, to crawl back to them out of exhaustion or guilt. But I wouldn't. Not this time. By nightfall, I reached my next destination, an unassuming coastal town, quieter than the tourist-heavy beach my family had invaded. The air smelled different here, saltier, cleaner, untouched by the chaos I had left behind. The streets were lined with small shops and cafes, a far cry from the luxury vacation rentals my family would have chosen. I found a small inn, the kind that accepted cash and didn't require identification beyond a name I had fabricated on the spot. The man at the desk barely glanced at me as he handed me the key, uninterested in who I was or where I had come from. It was perfect. For the first time in days, I let myself breathe. The room was simple, nothing like the private villa I had once planned for myself, but it didn't matter. It was mine. No one knew where I was. No one could drag me back. The door was locked, the curtains drawn, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt untouchable. And yet, even in the safety of my self-imposed exile, something felt wrong. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, a deep, gnawing sense that I was not as free as I had believed. The feeling had been creeping in since I left the cottage, a whisper of unease that refused to quiet itself. I had dismissed it at first, convincing myself that it was simply my mind adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation of control. But now, standing in the dim glow of the small inn, I knew better. I locked the door, checked the windows, listened to the silence. And then as I set my bag down, I noticed it. A folded piece of paper slipped beneath the door while I hadn't been looking. My stomach clenched as I picked it up, my pulse thrumming in my ears. The paper was unremarkable, the ink slightly smudged from the damp air, but the message was unmistakable. There was no name, no greeting, just a single sentence scrawled in handwriting I knew too well. I could already hear Madison's voice in my head, dripping with condescension, amusement, triumph. My sister had always played this game well, always found a way to turn things in her favor, always managed to win. And now, she had proven something I had hoped wasn't true. She hadn't just found me once, she could find me anywhere. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in on me as the weight of the realization settled in. I had been so careful, so deliberate, making sure to cover every trace of my movements. But I had made a mistake. I had underestimated Madison. It wasn't technology that had led her here. It wasn't a tracking app, wasn't a financial trail, wasn't even a direct tip-off. It was something far simpler. It was the way she had always known how to manipulate the world to work in her favor. She had likely charmed someone at the cottage, convinced a stranger to talk, to reveal something that seemed insignificant but had led her straight to me. I should have known. My sister had always been relentless, always unwilling to let me escape the role I had been assigned since childhood. And now, she wasn't just trying to drag me back. She was playing a different game entirely. She wanted me to know that I was being hunted. She wanted me to feel it. The note wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. I clenched the paper in my fist, my thoughts spinning. The version of me that had existed a week ago might have panicked. That version of me might have started packing again, running further, trying to disappear into another town, another place, hoping to slip through the cracks before Madison could tighten her grip. But that version of me no longer existed. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. Madison had made a mistake. By following me here, by proving that she would go to any lengths to pull me back, she had revealed something I hadn't fully understood until now. She needed me, not in the way a sister should need another, not out of love or genuine concern, but because my existence, my compliance, was a fundamental part of her world. Without me, Madison had no one to absorb the burden, no one to take the blame, no one to quietly sacrifice herself so that she could shine. That was why she had come after me. Not because she missed me, not because she was worried, but because my absence had disrupted the fragile ecosystem she had thrived in her entire life. And that gave me power. I wasn't going to run anymore. Not out of fear, not because I was cornered. I had spent years letting Madison dictate the rules of the game, letting her control the narrative. But this time, I wasn't playing to escape. I was playing to win. I carefully unfolded the crumpled note, smoothing it between my fingers as I read the words again. Madison had expected me to react, to run, to panic, to fall back into the familiar patterns of obedience. But she had no idea what was coming next. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the note in my hands, feeling the weight of everything crashed down on me all at once. Madison had always been persistent, always found a way to get what she wanted, always twisted the world to fit her needs. But this was something else. This was an obsession, a compulsion. She had tracked me down once, and now she was proving that she could do it again. She wanted me to feel her presence like a shadow looming behind me. Wanted me to know that no matter how far I ran, she would always be one step away, watching, waiting, ready to drag me back into the role she had assigned me since childhood. But she had made a mistake. I wasn't the person she had spent years controlling anymore. I wasn't the sister she could guilt and manipulate with carefully chosen words and expectations disguised as love. I had broken away. I had seen the truth. And now, I knew what she feared the most. It wasn't losing me. It was losing control over me. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around the note, the words burning into my mind. I wouldn't let her do this to me. I wouldn't let her turn my escape into another one of her victories. She thought she had me backed into a corner, but she didn't realize that I had already stepped out of the ring. She was playing a game with rules I no longer had to follow. I stood, my movements calm, my mind sharp. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a singular, focused thought. I had to disappear completely, and this time, it had to be permanent. Tearing the note into small pieces, I walked to the bathroom and flushed them away, watching as the ink smudged and dissolved, as if it had never existed. Then, I grabbed my bag, checked the room one last time, and stepped outside into the humid night air. The streets were quiet, save for the distant crashing of the waves and the occasional passing car. The town was asleep, unaware that somewhere in the darkness, my sister was hunting me. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of finding me again. Instead of running to the bus station or another hotel, places she would undoubtedly be watching, I walked straight into the heart of town, weaving through the dimly lit streets with purpose. I found a bar still open, its neon sign flickering as tired travelers and night workers nursed their final drinks. I stepped inside, blending into the crowd, keeping my head low. I ordered a drink I didn't plan to finish, just enough to let the scent cling to me, masking my trail. Then, I slipped out the back entrance and kept moving. I repeated this process in 2 more places, methodically erasing every trace of myself. If Madison was out there, searching, watching, she would be led in circles, grasping at trails that led nowhere. She would expect me to act like the Evelyn she had always known, the responsible one, the predictable one, the sister who could always be counted on to make the safe, rational choice. But that version of me no longer existed. By the time I reached the marina, I knew I had done enough. The docks were quiet, the scent of salt thick in the air. A few fishermen prepared for the early morning haul, their voices low and unbothered by my presence. I approached a man loading supplies onto his boat, my words careful but steady. I needed a ride, cash payment, no questions asked, just a quiet trip to the next town over, where I could slip away for good. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding, waving me aboard. As the boat pulled away from the dock, I turned, watching the town shrink in the distance, knowing that somewhere in those quiet streets, Madison was searching for me. She was expecting me to be scared. She was expecting me to run in predictable patterns, to make the same mistakes, to let my guilt pull me back. But I wasn't running. I was disappearing. The boat ride was slow, the water calm beneath us, reflecting the fading moonlight. I stood at the railing, inhaling the scent of salt and freedom, feeling the last remnants of my old life slip further away with each passing mile. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. No obligations, no responsibilities, no one waiting for me to serve them, to sacrifice for them, to play my part in a script I had never agreed to. I had spent my entire life being the afterthought, the one who gave and gave until there was nothing left. But now I was something else entirely. I was untethered, unclaimed, free. By the time we reached the next shore, the sun was beginning to rise, casting golden light across the water. I stepped on solid ground with nothing but the bag on my back and the knowledge that for the first time, I had done something purely for myself. I had no plan, no destination, no familiar path to follow. And yet I wasn't lost. I knew Madison would keep searching. She would retrace every step, question every person she thought might have seen me, obsess over where I could have gone. She would spin it into a story where she was the victim, where I was the selfish one for leaving, where she was only trying to bring me home. She would keep looking, convinced that she could find me, that she could fix this, that she could force everything back into place. But she was chasing a version of me that no longer existed. She could look for as long as she wanted. She would never find me again, and I would never let myself be found.